I want to ask you, you knew Reverend Clem Pinckney a little bit. What do you remember about him and his life?
I did not know him. I know of him, knew of him. And what I did know of him was that he was very active politically,
right,
and that he was a good minister in that area, highly regarded. I heard a lot of people, lawyers and others in this area, speak of him with great respect.
All right, I want to play a couple pieces of sound from the eulogy today of President Obama. He talked about race relations. It was kind of woven throughout the speech, but in particular, I want to play you this, and we'll talk about it in a second.
None of us can or should expect a transformation in race relations overnight. Every time something like this happens, somebody says, we have to have a conversation about race. We talk a lot about race. There's no shortcut. We don't need more talk. None of us should believe that a handful of gun safety measures will prevent every tragedy. It will not. But it would be a betrayal of everything Reverend Pinckney stood for, I believe, if we allowed ourselves to slip into a comfortable silence again. You're right.
Since the shootings in Charleston, there's been some progress on certain fronts with the flag. We'll talk about that in a moment. But at this moment, do you think this is a moment where there might be some real progress in terms of race relations? Is this the kind of thing that could spur real change? Or is this going to be kind of a sentimental moment where we all talk about how we want to get along and then go back to our original sins?
I think it will probably be another sentimental moment when we'll go back to our original sins. After 9/11, we made some pronouncements. Now, we've taken certain security measures, but we really have not dug deep into the problem of how something like that could happen. And we were hugging and we were embracing and we were inspiring. But I think we've been lulled back into a complacency which is dangerous for our nation. I think the same thing is going to be true with race. We seem to be going backwards. We were at one time in busing and integration, and now we have an African-American president. But look at the hell that he's caught. Now, he's had a great week, but this speech now is at the end of his term. Imagine if he could have made a speech like this at the beginning, absent the tragedy. It would have had much greater impact. We've had certain criticisms about how we move, and killing, while it is absolutely ridiculous and it's heinous, but what about the mortgage scandal? What about what's happening in education? And the president alluded to these things in his eulogy. These are the things we're going to have to drill down on, and with much stronger emphasis coming from the top.
Well, I mentioned the Confederate flag. President Obama talked about that also in his speech and said, look, this isn't just a symbol of ancestral pride. It's a symbol of oppression. It's a symbol of traitorous behavior on the part of the Confederacy. You went to Morehouse.
I did.
Are you surprised it took this long for us to get to this place, at least with respect to the Confederate flag itself?
No. And I don't think we would be here even now if it wasn't so close to an election. And you can note one thing. While the president praised the governor of South Carolina, she did not take that flag down until after Reverend Pinckney had to be escorted by it. It was an insult. And I think the deep-seated hatred that's in places like South Carolina, pockets there, is still across the country.
We even have Republicans now, though, and I don't dispute any of the things you just said, but we have Republicans now talking about taking down statues of Jefferson Davis, others from public spaces. So Mitch McConnell has made that proposal. How do you feel about that? I think everyone now agrees Confederate flag should go down. What's the place for any kind of memorials around the Confederacy? Should those all be gone? Busts, statues in all public spaces?
I haven't thought that deeply about it because it really doesn't matter. They can stay. If you're going to take down symbols of hatred and bigotry, you've got to start in front of the, is it the Museum of Natural History where Teddy Roosevelt is riding on his horse here in New York, and he's got a black man at one boot and a native man, a so-called Indian at the other? That's as racist as that flag is. The symbols are important to be removed. But the kind of discrimination that you see in schools, in mortgage scandals, the kind of discriminations you see in media are things that have to be addressed. And only the women and men at the top who can come down heavy and say, we will not tolerate this, and I will put all of my resources behind wiping it out, will win.
Let me ask you one more question. We only have about 30 seconds, but in keeping with that point you just made, in toto, at this point, 6.5 years into President Obama's presidency, are you disappointed that he hasn't led more on this issue, or do you think he's done about as well as could be expected?
I think he's done about as well as can be expected. I applaud this president because of all the presidents that I've known in my lifetime, he's been one of the best. He's certainly one of the smartest. And he has been in a difficult place, and he has handled that well. I am hoping only that he will not be the last, because that'll be another indication of how far we've come in race.